So let me again welcome you all to this conference on the hidden dimension of poverty that we are very, very pleased to host today at the OECD Conference Center. And during this conference, we will have presentations and discussions of the main conclusions of the international research project conducted by ATD Fourth World International and Oxford University. Actually, when Xavier Godineau, sitting next to me from ATD Fourth World, approached me, and I think it was in 2015, yes. Xavier, and asked me whether I would be interested to in collaborating on this project on the hidden dimension, on the measurement of the hidden dimension of poverty. I actually thought that there was a lot of similarities in the setup of the project with the work we have been conducting here at the OECD since 2011 on the measurement of well-being. First, what we have put forward in our work on the measurement of well-being, the framework that we have developed is really people-centered. It really puts people at the center of our policy objectives. So we're not talking about growth, economic growth, nor about improving the economic system. We are talking about improving people's lives. Second, what was very interesting is that from the start, the work that was envisaged was really to bring the multidimensionality approach to the measurement of poverty. And again, here are a lot of similarities with the way we've been approaching well-being beyond material conditions, looking at the many aspects of quality of life that matter to people. Third, as we have ourselves recommended, and actually that was a recommendation of the first, and you may have heard about this report, the Stiglitz-Fitoussi report, and some members of the Stiglitz-Fitoussi report commission who participated in the report from the Commission are with us. Actually, François Bourguignon is with us today. There was a recommendation in that report to include in our measurement framework the measurement of subjective well-being. Because after all, who can tell how life is for people if we don't ask people themselves? I mean, people are the best place to actually tell about their living conditions. And that was something that was very interesting, I thought, as well, in the project that Xavier presented to us. And finally, our framework also puts a lot of emphasis on inequalities and deprivation, looking at the performance or outcomes in well-being across population groups, not leaving anyone behind, which is, as you know, the motto of the Sustainable Development Goals that all countries of the UN have now embraced. So this notion of looking at every segment of the population, and in particular the most deprived segment of the population, is also something that was very similar to our own framework. But I must say I was also intrigued and curious about the methodology that was proposed in this project, called the merging of knowledge, or in French, Xavier, le croisement des savoirs. And we will hear about this during. We welcome the Secretary General with us now. We will hear about this methodology during the conference. And finally, I was really also very interested, in fact, in confronting the results of the project, which will be presented to us today, with what we, statisticians and economists, have been doing for such a long time on the measurement of poverty. Is it changing our perspectives? Is it changing the way we're looking at things? So for all these reasons, I accepted to become a member of the Scientific Advisory Board on the project since its start in September 2015, when we had our first meeting, alongside François Bourguignon, Emeritus Professor at Paris School of Economics, Gaël Giraud, the chief economist at the Agence Française de Développement at the time, Grace Bentebia Kyo-Muhendo, please forgive me for mispronouncing your name, professor at the School of Women and Gender Studies at the University of Makerere in Uganda, and Ides Nikes, professor at the University of Leuven, Belgium, who are all with us today. So thank you very much for joining us today. Other members of the Scientific Advisory Board included Sabina Alkhair, whom many of you know from the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, Paul Hickley from the UK Department of International Development, DFID, Francesca Perucci from the UN Statistical Division, Magdalena Sepulveda from the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development in Mexico, and Christopher Winship from Harvard University. Unfortunately, they were not able to join us today. Let me welcome the members of the International Coordination Team of the research. Robert Walker, who is sitting there. Hello, Robert. And Rachel, you're sitting over there, Rachel, from Oxford University. But of course, Xavier Godineau and Marianne Delatte, whom I see there too. Hi, Marianne, from ATD Fourth World, with whom I and my colleagues interacted very closely in previous meetings and also in meetings to prepare for this event. But let me welcome in particular a very warm welcome to the members of the 6 national research teams that are with us today, from Bangladesh, from Bolivia, from France, from Tanzania, the United Kingdom, and the United States, who are with us today. So grateful that you were able to come and participate in the meeting. Because I must say that the members of these teams really committed a lot of their time, their intelligence, and dedication to the success of the project. And they are really the people who made this project, really made the project and delivered on the results. So I will have the privilege to chair the first part of this conference this morning, before passing the baton to my colleagues Mario Pezzini, the director of the OECD Development Center, and Monica Gweisser, who join us a little bit later, who is the senior counselor in the Employment, Labor, and Social Affairs departments here at the OECD. And they will chair the 2 panels this morning. And I will then resume my role as chair this afternoon at 5 for the reporting in this room by the rapporteurs of the 5 panel sessions this afternoon. But with no further ado, we have the privilege of having the Secretary General with us. And thank you so much for joining us for this event, Secretary General. So let me give you the floor for your opening address.
Thank you so much, Martine, and dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome you today and equality, appropriately called COPE. This is a conference on the hidden dimensions of poverty, and I'm also particularly pleased to welcome the research team from ATD Fourth World and Oxford University, as well as many qualified experts in poverty measurement and poverty policy, who will be presenting the key findings of this 3-year research project on the hidden dimensions of poverty. And I'd like to congratulate Martine and her team for not only being part of it, but also for having made very important contributions. Now, understanding and addressing poverty and inequalities is a key priority for the OECD. We know that inequalities and deprivation loom large and are far from being eradicated, even in the richest countries of the world. Today, the average income of the richest 10% of the OECD population is 10 times that of the poorest 10%. Now, so 10, 10, 10. It sounds pretty symmetric. And what is the meaning of it? The meaning of it is that one generation ago, it was 7 times. And today it is 10 times. And it moved in the wrong direction so fast. And it increased by 40%. This is why this number is meaningful. This is why this number is very dire, very serious. In the OECD, income poverty measured in relative terms, i.e. taking as a benchmark half of median income in each country, so you take half the median income and you say, okay, that's the poverty line. So why? Because Poland, Italy, United States, Germany are different in absolute levels. But the question is, you take the median income, you divide it by half, you say anything below that is poverty, anything above that is above poverty. Well, that has increased from 10% to 12%. Again, going in the wrong direction. Maybe not as fast as the income distribution, but certainly bad. But when looking at the post-crisis period, poverty increases were much larger when evaluated in what we call anchored poverty, i.e. when setting the benchmark to pre-crisis median income level. In Greece, for example, what you would call anchored poverty more than doubled between 2007 and 2011. And in 2016, it was still 31%, while if you would do it in the conventional way of relative poverty, it would have been about half of that. So there are ways of being more penetrating in the analysis when you really look hard at the numbers. And then you get to numbers which are, well, if anything, higher. To help us assess and indeed tackle inequalities in all its dimensions, in 2012 we launched the OECD Inclusive Growth Initiative. Today's event is an important step in this effort. We have with us people that best understand the true meaning of poverty. Not only those who study it, but also those who actually experience it on a daily basis. As an intergovernmental organization, we regularly host ministers, high-level officials, experts, and all too often we focus our poverty work and our vocabulary to them, forgetting to learn from and listen to and amplify the voices of those who are actually suffering from the poverty. This conference, therefore, provides us with a unique opportunity. Thank you for being here. Thank you for helping us and also helping us to remind what are the fundamental issues here at stake. Thank you for strengthening our mettle and making our backbone stronger. Thank you. It provides us with a unique opportunity to listen to real-life experience. Those living in poverty can bring to the forefront the aspects that experts often miss. They can shed light on what we call the hidden dimensions of poverty. This is why the title, the hidden dimensions of poverty, the part that we don't obviously see, that is not easily observable. The stigma, the prejudice, the discrimination of those living in poverty, the problems, the obstacles they regularly encounter, how poor people are treated, how isolated they are, how disempowered they are, and how disempowered and how isolated they are made to feel by the rest of us. These hidden dimensions are the hardest to capture with statistics, but the hidden dimensions of poverty also speak to some more basic economic facts. For instance, poor people experience higher living costs when lower quality but cheaper retail goods are replaced in supermarkets by higher quality but more expensive goods. They also experience longer commutes when they go to work, when urban development pushes them to live further and further away from their places of work, sometimes to areas with higher exposure to crime and environmental degradation. And the poor often do not have access to the same services most of us take for granted. Low-cost bank accounts, traditional forms of credit, mobile subscriptions, or legal assistance. All those things, they're there for us, and they're not there for the poorest. They then incur high fees and high risks when having to turn to, to check to cashiers or take. So if you don't have a bank, you don't have a normal type of credit, you fall in the hands of a loan shark. And then you become their servant. You become almost enslaved to them. Predatory landlords. You pay comparatively more for products and services that they cannot buy in bulk at the Walmart. We can do it. They can't, because they live day to day. For these and many other reasons, we should pay close attention to what our guests will tell us here today in order to make our policies more responsive to their needs. Now, today's event is also important on a second account. New research is considerably advancing poverty measurement for countries at all stages of development. For too long, discussions about poverty have been characterized by a gulf in how poverty is measured, how poverty is analyzed in poor and rich countries alike. The 2030 Agenda calls on all countries in the world, rich and poor, to eradicate extreme poverty. And yet the conventional metrics that are used to measure extreme poverty, based on the $1.9 per day threshold, tell us that extreme poverty has long been eradicated in most OECD countries. Now, problem. This conclusion is at odds with what people with direct experience of poverty report about their lives. And it reflects the inadequacy of these metrics. Now, for the first time, the ATD Oxford University research places a bridge across this gulf in the measurement approaches between rich and poor countries. In doing so, they include countries at different stages of development, allowing us to see poverty through a single perspective. For example, one aspect that was identified with people in all countries as core to the experience of being poor was, quote, suffering in body, mind, and heart, unquote, due to the fear, the hopelessness, the stress, and the uncertainty. The uncertainty. Every day, with uncertainty just next to you, just above you, just over you, all around. Looking ahead, we also need to focus on the fact that poverty is multidimensional. It goes beyond income. Since 2011, we have defined, quote unquote, the good life. through a framework that spans from material conditions to quality of life, from wealth to skills, from health to political voice, from social connections to subjective well-being. We know, for example, that while around 12% of the OECD population is economically poor, 3 times that much, 36%, have assets placing them only 3 months away from poverty. If for any reason this 12% would forgo or lose 3 months of their regular income, they would become poor. And so you're talking about more than a third of the population that is living almost day to day. Now, in addition, vulnerability touches many other aspects of life. 15% of all adults have skills below the minimum needed for everyday life, and therefore they're highly vulnerable to being displaced by technology. 10% rate their health as bad or very bad. 8% report having no relatives and friends they can count on. 47% think they have no say on what their government does. That's half of the population. And then we're surprised because of these electoral results. But when we see this, they feel completely away, disempowered, nothing to do with what the government does. My voice doesn't count. Why should I even go to vote? Why should I care about whether Brexit or no Brexit? 60% of the youth in the UK did not go and vote in the Brexit. That is perhaps the most worrisome part of the outcome, regardless of what happened or whether you agree or not. And I'm sure they regret it, because their whole future was at stake, and they did not go and vote. 60%. Just a few of them could have changed the whole thing. 26% don't feel safe when walking alone at night in their neighborhoods, and 37% of urban residents are exposed to air pollution that exceeds the World Health Organization's targets. Now, the real difficulty in building a single multidimensional poverty measure lies in measuring all these aspects at the same time. How do you do this and put it in one single number? This type of measure would go a long way towards changing our policy discussions about poverty. It would imply that poverty is not just the responsibility of social policy ministers setting cash benefits for households in need, but also for finance ministers, labor ministers, health ministers, education ministers, housing ministers. This is why our discussions here are so important, why today is so important. We have purposefully brought together all stakeholders to discuss the nature of poverty, to discover its hidden dimensions and the challenges they raise in the areas of measurement, policy, and action. At the OECD, we will work hard to develop additional measures that capture the most intangible and pernicious dimensions of poverty, such as disempowerment and stigma, and to promote the standardization of social and household surveys, the tools needed to build comprehensive measures of poverty. Ladies and gentlemen, in the words of Amartya Sen, a good friend of this house, and actually the predecessor to Martin in the work that is being done with Joe Stiglitz and Mr. Fitoussi on the question of GDP and beyond. You know, what are the other dimensions of well-being? Amartya Sen said, quote, "Poverty is not just a lack of money. It's not having the capability to realize one's full potential as a human being, unquote. Allowing people around the world to reach their full potential is our responsibility. So let's continue to make the eradication of poverty in all countries a key priority of our policies. You can count on the OECD's support in delivering the 2030 agenda to end poverty as we know it today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary General, for these very inspiring thoughts. We know you cannot stay, and so we, again, thank you for having been with us for the beginning of this meeting. We'll report back to you on the outcomes.
Thank you. There's going on an Economic Policy Committee, a two-day meeting of the Economic Policy Committee, chaired by the Chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors of the President of the United States, Mr. Kevin Hassett. And I really have to be there. We're trying to see if we can fix the world to make your work a little easier. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think it was worthwhile, right, waiting for listening to the Secretary General. So now we move on to the rest of our agenda, and it is really my pleasure, after the speech from the Secretary General, to give the floor to Baroness Ruth Lister for a keynote address. Baroness Lister of Battersea is currently Professor of Social Policy at Loughborough University. Many of you, of course, know her work. She has written and contributed to a number of books and articles on poverty, social security, and women's citizenship. The Baroness graduated in sociology from University of Essex and got an MA in multiracial studies from University of Sussex. She has received many honorary doctorates from universities of Manchester, Essex, and Glasgow, Caledonian University. She was appointed Commander of the Order of the British Empire in 1999, Fellow of the British Academy in 2009, and Life Peer to the House of Lords in 2011. And she currently sits on the Joint Committee of Human Rights, the board of the Smith Institute. She's a Vice Chair of the Fair Pay Network and patron of Just Fair. In 2010, the Baroness received a Lifetime Achievement from the Social Policy Association, and in 2005 was co-recipient of the Queen's Anniversary Prize for Higher and Further Education, awarded to the university for contribution to social policy. So I think we could not have a better person today to talk to us about the art of ignoring the poor. That's the title of the Baroness' speech. And the title of the speech, correct me if I'm wrong, I think was, which comes from an article by John Kenneth Galbraith that appeared in 1985 in Harper's Magazine. And I was actually disseminated in France by Le Monde Diplomatique, renowned newspaper, in 2005. So it's my really pleasure to give the floor to the Baroness. Please, the floor is yours.
Merci. Good morning. Bonjour. It's my honor to be asked to give this keynote address prior to discussion of such an important research project. In many ways, I feel I'm simply reflecting back to you insights that have come from the work of ATD Fourth World and the kind of research many of you have been engaged in. Is this working? No, it's not. Oh, yes. Sorry, now it's
Very slow.
slow. Sorry about this. I'll leave it at that then. It's okay. No, that's right. It's perspective. Although I speak very much from a Western perspective, I acknowledge the insights that Western poverty research and activism have gained from participatory work in the global South. My own understanding of poverty, developed initially through my work with the Child Poverty Action Group, a campaigning charity in the UK, and as an academic, has been deepened and enriched by listening to those who speak from lived experience, a kind of personal merging of knowledge, if you like. One thing it has taught me, and that has emerged so strongly from this international research project, is the importance of the psychosocial. That is the interaction of social and psychological elements, and the relational rooted in social relationships, in understanding how poverty is experienced. That is not to understate the importance of the material, the lack of resources sufficient to participate fully in society, which is what defines poverty, and the economic insecurity or precarity and powerlessness typically associated with it. But economic deprivation, insecurity, and powerlessness have psychological effects, and poverty is given meaning through relationships with others at both the interpersonal and societal level, including through interactions with professionals and officials. The intriguing title I've been given, and I didn't realise where it came from, raises questions that go to the heart of what we're here to discuss today. Just all play ball. Yeah. The first part of my address will explore what I believe accounts for the art of ignoring the poor, and that is the dehumanization of people experiencing poverty due to them being seen as other, and due to the way in which statistics, important as they are, can obscure the people they count. In the second part, I'll suggest that two interrelated counter-narratives, which recognize the agency or capacity to act and human rights of people living in poverty, can help shift the angle of vision so that the wider society can see people in poverty as fellow citizens, fellow human beings, suffering in body, mind, and heart, to quote from the project's report. And I'll suggest that art itself has a role to play. So if the non-poor fail to perceive people in poverty as fellow human beings with similar needs, aspirations, and dreams, it's all too easy to ignore them. Two quotations from the wonderful ATD The Roles We Play photo collection provide clues as to what underlies this inability to see. The first is from Paul, who described himself as thinker. We have to step out from the shadows of statistics and come forward to present ourselves as more than just mere numbers. The other is from Kathy, human rights activist. The stereotyping of all poor people dehumanizes them in the eyes of others. As Ruth Siddell put it, statistics are people with the tears washed off. In our preoccupation with categorizing, classifying, and counting the poor, we blind ourselves to how they constitute what Jacques Rancière describes as a category of people who do not count. And as ATD's founder, Père Joseph Rosinski, observed, the greatest misfortune is to know that you count for nothing, to the point where even your suffering is ignored. This was expressed forcefully by an informant in a UK study who said he felt he was treated as a zero, and that nothing at all value is a destroying experience. I am invisible. Yet visibility does not of itself mean recognition. As the Fourth World University Research Group's report on the earlier merging of knowledge project noted, genuine visibility requires recognition of people in poverty as fellow human beings and not as a problem to be solved. This brings us to the second factor contributing to the dehumanization of people in poverty, the process of othering. Othering describes how the more powerful non-poor treat the less powerful poor as different and inferior. It's a dualistic process of differentiation and demarcation that draws a line between us and them, which establishes, maintains, and justifies social distance. It's closely associated with and reinforced by the related social processes of stereotyping and stigmatization. It is not a neutral line, for it is imbued with negative value judgments that diminish and construct the poor variously as a source of moral contamination, a threat to be feared, an undeserving economic burden, an object of pity, or even as an exotic species. And at this point, it's worth saying that when I use the term the poor, I'm putting it in what Americans call scare quotation marks, because lumping together the diverse human beings living in poverty in this way itself risks contributing to the dehumanizing process of othering. Even at its most benign, othering denies people in poverty their complex humanity and subjectivity. Less benign, it robs them of any humanity. Othering shapes how the non-poor think, talk about, and act towards the poor at both an interpersonal and institutional level. And it's reflected in the language and labels used to describe the poor in a way that denies them what has been called representational agency, i.e. power over how oneself is represented. Mark Peel, author of an insightful Australian study, reflecting on how some of our most respectable citizens refer to people in poverty, concludes that somehow poor people have never quite become part of a common humanity. To treat poor people so harshly, he says, you have to see them as unlike you in a very fundamental way. The media contribute to the process of othering in the typically negative ways they represent poverty, particularly for those without first-hand knowledge of it, though of course people in poverty may themselves see these representations also. Traditionally, poverty has tended to be marginalized in the mainstream media, seen as depressing and not newsworthy, or at best has been reduced to statistics or pitiful portraits, which themselves can reinforce social distance through what we might call sympathetic othering. More recently in the UK, and I believe elsewhere, it has acquired entertainment value through what has been dubbed poverty porn, short for pornography TV. Here, the poor, and particularly women, are treated as objects of scorn for spectator sport. Such vilification is then amplified through social media, although increasingly that also provides a forum for people in poverty themselves to resist such portrayals. Overall, therefore, the othering of the poor means that to the extent they are not ignored, they are typically targets at best of the non-poor's pity or indifference, and at worst, their fear, contempt, disgust, or hostility. As a consequence, people living in poverty feel shamed and humiliated. Robert Walker and colleagues' previous international research shows how what they identified as the poverty-shame nexus causes social and psychological pain. This can be particularly difficult to bear for children and young people whose identities are developing. And it tends to be mothers who carry the burden and guilt of trying to shield their children from the shame of poverty as part of their work as the domestic shock absorbers of poverty. And we should not underestimate the depth and impact of the social and psychological pain that shame and othering can cause when they make people feel inadequate, worthless, without dignity. A theological essay on human dignity and poverty observes that blindness to the other erodes another sense of dignity as source of self-respect. The words dignity and respect speak to a very basic human need for recognition of one's humanity. The sociologist Richard Sennett spells out what the withholding of recognition and respect means. Quote, lack of respect, though less aggressive than an outright insult, can take an equally wounding form. No insult is offered another person, but neither is recognition extended. He or she is not seen as a full human being whose presence matters. Or as Millicent Sims, a young unemployed woman, told a UK national poverty hearing, I just feel very angry sometimes that people are ignorant to the fact that we are humans as well and we do need to be respected. She reminds us that the art of ignoring the poor is an art rooted in ignorance of the humanity of the fellow human beings who constitute the poor. The internalization of shame and humiliation can be damaging to the psyche, but the kind of anger expressed by Millicent can also fire struggle and resistance, identified in broad terms as part of the core experience of poverty in the research. And this brings me to the counter-narratives, or ways of talking, that I believe can help puncture the art of ignoring and stroke the ignorance of people in poverty through recognition of our shared humanity. The counter-narratives are agency and human rights. They are exemplified by ATD's Roles We Play project I mentioned earlier. Reflecting on the project, again, Kathy, the self-defined human rights activist, sums it up. It means I am not invisible anymore. I am recognized as a human being with thoughts, feelings, and aspirations. I feel respected. It helps me define myself more positively and feel I have a valuable part to play in society. And the ATD report's subtitle, Recognizing the Contribution of People in Poverty, is an implicit statement of their agency. In other words, that people in poverty are, like everyone else, creative actors capable of a degree of choice and able to make a difference in their own and other people's lives, even if only in a small way. This can simply be through the agency involved in getting by, the struggle to survive so well described in the Hidden Dimensions report. To quote, struggling and resisting are intimately linked in people's efforts to survive. The struggle takes different forms, many of which remain invisible to the rest of society. Creativity is used to meet basic needs in imaginative ways, a process through which new skills are learned, unquote. It can also be, through example, attempts to get out of poverty, or through resisting the othering processes I've described, or through collective action to improve conditions in local communities. An evaluation of the Roles We Play project described reactions to the exhibition to which it led. A common reaction from a group of students was that the exhibition humanized what had previously been to them an abstract issue of numbers and concepts. One responded she was now trying to consider poverty from their perspective. Also, these people aren't, she said, just poor souls in need. They do important things for others that keep things working. In other words, the project, which emphasizes the agency of people in poverty, helped the students see them as fellow human beings with a role to play, not just objects of their research. But agency cannot be considered separate from structure, wider social, economic, and political institutions and processes. For people in poverty, agency tends to be heavily constrained by oppressive structures in which the more powerful are able to exercise agency to their advantage. Moreover, research has shown how the corrosive impact of shaming and othering on feelings of self-worth can itself stunt agency. Conversely, it's been suggested that recognition of the agency of another is a mark of respect. Recognition and respect of human dignity are at the heart of a human rights approach to poverty and are critical to challenging the othering and dehumanization of people in poverty because they are premised on what we share and have in common as human beings. The UN Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights has underlined the interrelationship with agency. Quote, perhaps most importantly, the language of rights recognizes and insists on the dignity and agency of all individuals, regardless of race, gender, social status, age, disability, or any other distinguishing feature. And it is intentionally empowering. Disempowerment is identified as part of the core experience of poverty by the Hidden Dimensions research. Power, not pity, became a rallying cry of American poverty activists who used the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in their everyday organizing, quote, to counter the denial and shame of being poor. At an individual level, the human rights approach can be transformative. An unpublished evaluation of a poverty and human rights project by the British Institute of Human Rights observed that a form of alchemy took place. People's lives and their view of themselves were transformed. It demonstrated what is at the heart of a human rights-based approach, people seeing themselves, often for the first time, as human beings who are worth something just by dint of being human and who are entitled to be treated with dignity and respect. So I've argued that the art of ignoring the poor is a form of ignorance, rooted in the dehumanizing othering of the poor, who are at best reduced to abstract statistics or pitiful objects. Merging of knowledge research of the kind we're discussing today helps to puncture this ignorance and contribute to alternative narratives of agency and human rights in which people in poverty stand as fellow citizens, fellow human beings. So too can art itself. The ATD Roles We Play project is a work of art in which participants had full control of how they were portrayed and as a result saw it as, I quote, a celebration of who we are. So I'd just like to finish with a poem from an earlier ATD creative writing project, which makes the demand to be seen as human much more powerfully than I can. It's called All People, All Human. I'm telling the people with power that I have power too. If you stifle my voice and deny me a choice, I will show my power to you. I will not come with a weapon. I will not come in fear. I will come with others as sisters and brothers, and a voice you will have to hear. I'm telling the people with knowledge that I have knowledge too. If you ignore my words and deny what you've heard, my knowledge will be lost to you. I will not come in anger. I will not come in pain. I will come as me with dignity, and your denial will be to your shame. I'm telling the people with control that I have control too. If you put me in chains, then hatred reigns, and fear gains control of you. I will not come as a prisoner. I will not come broken to you. I will come with pride and stand by your side because I am human too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Baroness Lister, for this keynote speech. I think, of course, in your speech you raised really fundamental questions that I'm sure we will address during the course of the day. I'd just like to, I cannot, of course, being in the position where I sit and starting back from where this project all started, which was to some extent not only about coming up with the hidden dimensions, revealing the hidden dimensions of poverty, but also trying to measure those dimensions of poverty. I was struck by your comments on the fact that statistics can be misinterpreted, I would say, by people considering that if you start counting the poor, and I think it goes perhaps beyond counting the poor, but describing also their living conditions and situation, then they become a number, and this can lead to stigmatization. And I think this is a fair point. It's a very fair comment. On the other hand, we're also very cognizant of the fact that if you don't measure something, that you can also ignore it completely. And that can be also a problem to some extent, because you don't know the extent of the issue and you don't know how to address the issue. And therefore, it is a problem. So we're there with this conundrum to some extent. Should we measure then, or should we not? Should we just talk about the experiences and provide qualitative information on the experiences of the people living in poverty, such as the ones that you just highlighted: disempowerment, stigmatization, dehumanization, and also your notion of, othering, as you mentioned, and being shamed or something, or the like. And should we also try to capture the capacity of the poor to exercise their agency in the context of the institutions in which, where they live? All those are fundamental questions, because if we start from the premises that by essence the statistics would lead to stigmatization, would actually create more problems than they would help to resolve, then we have to discuss. Because as statisticians here, some of us, and economists around the table, we have the feeling that by putting numbers on things, we can help solve problems. But we have to be careful about how then we use those numbers, we use those statistics, and how we can make sure that they don't lead to the sort of problem that you just mentioned. I think that is a very good introduction, actually, to some of the issues that we will be discussing in the during the day. But I think we should keep that at the back of our mind, because we need to find a rejoinder to some extent. How can we continue to measure? How? Because measuring always requires some methodological choices. And by making methodological choices, you try not to be normative, but any choice you make about methodologies mean that you introduce some normative aspects to your measurement and value judgment in your measurement. So we have to be very careful and cognizant of this. And I think we should keep that for the rest of the day as we move, and in particular this afternoon when we go into the breakout sessions, to make sure that we do not lose those insights from your speech. So thank you very much again. I think we now will show the video, the short video, that is actually going to describe the methodology of the project. So if we could launch the video, please, and perhaps turn off the lights for everybody to see the video.
Kwa hatua ya kwanza kabisa huwa tunapitia katika serikali ya mtaa pamoja na viongozi katika eneo husika ambalo tunaenda kubainisha watu. Tukishatoka hapo ndio tunaanza kupitia kama ni marafiki wa ATD ili kutubainisha wale watu tunaohitaji, au kupitia serikali tunatembelea watu majumbani mwao ili kupata ridhaa yao na kuona maisha yao halisi wanaoishi. Na baada ya hapo tunawaachia fomu ambayo tutaelezea malengo ya mradi na mradi unahitaji nini kutoka kwao. Tukishatoka hapo tunapitia tena siku ya pili ili kupata ridhaa yao. Kwa hiyo muhimu zaidi watu tunatembelea tu majumbani mwao na sehemu zao za kazi.
Nilikuwa najiuliza kwamba je, hiki vikao vinaenda kufanyika kweli? Nimependa kwa moyo mmoja bila kulazimishwa, ni mimi mwenyewe nimejitoa. Lakini swali likawa linakuja, najiuliza, je, nitakapotoka hapa ninaenda kule kwenye vikao nikiwa kama mimi ni mama wa familia ya watoto 4 na mimi ndo ni baba wa hiyo familia ya watoto 4, Je, nikitoka hapa nikaenda kule kwenye semina ya vikao vinne vya siku 3. Je, hawa watoto wangu nitawaacha vipi? Au nikitoka mimi kule labda nitakuwa nimekunywa maji, nimekunywa soda, aidha nimebahatika nimekula chakula. Je, nikirudi nyumbani watoto wangu mimi nitawakidhi lini ili jioni na wenyewe wapate kupata riziki? Ndio ilikuwa wasiwasi wangu mkubwa.
Nimejifunza vitu vingi. Kitu cha kwanza kikubwa ambacho nimejifunza ni jinsi ambavyo ushirikishwaji unafanyika kwenye mradi, kwa maana kwamba wanashirikisha makundi mengi ya watu ambao yanakuja na mtazamo tofauti na yakiwakilisha uhalisia wa umaskini. Makundi ya wasomi, wale ambao wanafanya kazi na maskini, lakini maskini wenyewe. Lakini kilichonifurahisha mimi zaidi ni pale ambapo wale maskini wenyewe, wale wahusika, wanapopata fursa ya kueleza ni nini chanzo cha umaskini wao, tofauti na tafiti nyingi ambazo maskini wanasemewa. Lakini katika mfumo huu maskini wenyewe wanajieleza kwa nini maskini. Sasa hicho ndicho kimenifurahisha, kwa sababu utaona mawazo ya maskini na mawazo ya wasomi mara zingine yanatofautiana.
Mafuta hivyo kuna changamoto nyingi zinazofanya tuzipate, lakini sasa sababu hatuna kwa kwenda na maisha tumetegemea hapa, inabidi kila siku tunapigana hivyo hivyo. Mtu naamka saa 10, kwa mfano kama mimi naamka saa 10 napata supu. Wezi wanaiba, mara wakakuibia. Kwa mfano ukiweka ndoo ya supu hapa, umeenda kuchota maji, unarudi ndoo ya supu haipo. Ushaibiwa. Mimi na watoto 5 wanasoma. Kwa hiyo na kazi sina. Kazi yangu ndio hii, nafanya biashara hapa kusudi nisomeshe watoto wangu. Na utakuta ni changamoto, ila yenyewe haitoshi. Siku nyingine uweki kabisa.
Karibuni sana.
Na ulipokuja huu mradi waliona kwamba yupo kijana ambaye anaweza kufanikisha mradi ukafika mbele. Nashukuru kwa sababu nakutana na watu wa aina mbalimbali, napata mawazo ya aina mbalimbali
Kitu katika historia ya maisha yako.
Ili watu waweze kufunguka, tuna njia za aina mbalimbali. Njia moja hapo ni tunaomba watuelezee mambo mazuri na mambo mabaya waliopitia katika maisha yao. Kiukweli tunapata mambo mengi sana yanayohusiana na umaskini.
Baada ya kufariki baba, ikabidi mama afanyeje? Arudi kwa wazazi wake. Mama akarudi kwao, aliporudi kwao ikabidi aanze maisha upya. Kuanza maisha upya ikabidi apate mwanaume mwingine kukaa naye. Alipomchukua yule mwanaume, mimi akawa amenikataa yule mwanaume. Ikabidi nikae kwa bibi zamani. Yule bibi naye akawa hana uwezo wa kufanyaje? Wa kujikimu. Kusema kwamba atafute chakula ale yeye pamoja na watoto zake, chakula kikawa ni nini? Shida. Ikabidi nitoke niende kwa mama. Ikabidi nikae nyumbani. Nimekaa mwaka 94, mwaka 95, mwaka 96. Akanilazimisha kuolewa.
Kuna vitu hapa ambavyo nilikuwa nataka tuviangalie. Ni vipi ambavyo ni sifa zinazokutambulisha maskini, lakini ni vipi ambavyo ni visababishi, na vipi kama wewe umesema kwamba vingine ni athari za umaskini wako.
Mimi katika mtazamo wangu, vipo vitu ambavyo vinasababisha mtu awe maskini na zipo athari za umaskini. Mojawapo ya vitu ambavyo vinamfanya mtu awe maskini ni pamoja na kuto kushiriki katika sera za maeneo yake, katika kutunga na hata katika kuzitekeleza.
Ambayo imetajwa.
Kwa hivyo hii inampelekea yeye kuwa maskini, kwa sababu anaishi kwenye ulimwengu ambao kinachotekelezwa yeye hakushiriki. Kwa hivyo hata ufahamu wake au ushiriki wake lazima utakuwa chini.
Ndio hitimisho la mzunguko wa kwanza mzima wa shughuli ya utafiti wa kubaini vipimo vya umaskini katika mkoa wa Dar es Salaam. Kama mlivyokwisha elezwa hapo awali kwamba huu mradi unatumia njia ya ushirikishwaji wa kina, deeply participative approach, kwamba tunashirikisha katika namna ambayo kila mmoja anashiriki kutoa uzoefu wake, mawazo yake na mitazamo yake kuhusiana masuala mbalimbali ya umaskini.
Elimu na amani.
Amani hapo inakuwa kwa amani.
Ndio kuwe na amani hapo, elimu ndio
Kwa sababu amani kama amani na wanafunzi kufundisha.
Kwa hiyo tunakubaliana nini?
Amani.
Sasa hapa tuangalie kipato na mila na desturi. Kipi kinafanya mimi bwana hapa siwezi kuvumilia? Mtu kaolewa au sisi tuko na mimi na wewe tuko kwenye familia na mtoto wa kiume. Lakini leo wazazi wakifa, tunaambiwa kwamba hizi mali zote ni za mtoto wa kiume. Mimi nitaenda kuolewa. Wewe utaolewa. Na kuna mila zingine kwamba mtoto wa kike pale haisabiki hata shamba upewe. Na sasa tuangalie hivi kipato na mila na desturi kipi hakivumiliki. Mimi naona mila na desturi. Mila na desturi haivumiliki.
Sasa kila kikundi tutajie kipimo ambacho wamebaini kwamba ndicho kinachosababisha maisha kuwa magumu kuliko vipimo vyote. Ni kipi? Tutajie, tunakiandika hapa kwa sababu tunakiandika hapa. Bwana wana taaluma, kipimo gani ambacho tumeona kwamba kinafanya maisha kuwa magumu zaidi ama kutovumilika?
Kilichopata maki nyingi kwetu hapa tunaona ni
Kipato. Na practitioners,
tumeona kipimo cha mtazamo hasi ndicho ambacho kinafanya maisha kuwa magumu.
mtazamo hasi. Haya, wanaume kipimo gani?
Amani. Bila amani kazi hakuna na biashara hakuna.
Kwa kina mama? Amani.
Sababu bila amani hakuna kazi yoyote ambayo inaweza kufanyika. Ukiwa na amani na utulivu katika nchi ndio mtu anaweza kufanya biashara, unaweza kulima, unaweza kufanya chochote.
So after this very telling video, I'm now going to give the floor to Xavier Godineau, who will say a few words on the rationale of the project, and I will then pass on the floor to Robert Walker to present the key results of the project. Please, Xavier.
Madame la chef statisticienne.
Madam Chief Statistician of the OECD, guests and friends. On behalf of the international movement ATD Fourth World, first of all, I would like to thank the Center for Opportunity and Equality of the OECD for hosting this meeting here on these premises. Madame Martine Durand, I would like to thank you very sincerely and thank your teams for the intellectual and logistical support that you gave us in preparing for this event. I would also like to thank all of the members of the scientific board that have accompanied us since the beginning. It's a great honor for us and great good fortune to be received here on these premises. We are dealing with more than social issues because your approach is global. You are fostering peace, fighting against poverty and inequality, and fostering sustainable development with its three components, economic, social, and environmental. Your understanding and your support, Martine Durand, explain why we're here today. And what are the reasons that enabled us to design and implement this international research on the dimensions of poverty with the researchers from Oxford University, Rachel Bray and Robert Walker? Well, the Sustainable Development Objectives adopted by the United Nations in 2015 commit all countries to eliminating poverty in all of its forms and all of its dimensions, including extreme poverty. But what are the forms and the dimensions of poverty, and who makes that decision? To answer this question, we wanted to involve in our international research the best experts on poverty. And who are these people? First of all, those who experience poverty directly, because they have an inside knowledge of the devastating effects of poverty and what produces poverty. We gave priority to their knowledge, which we have merged with the knowledge of professionals who are working alongside them in the field, and with the knowledge of academics who have been working with the other two groups to develop a rigorous scientific procedure. We hope that this conference will show you all of the benefits and advantages of such an approach. I would now like to give the floor to Robert Walker, who is an emeritus professor of the University of Oxford, currently teaching in China at the National University of Beijing.
I want to begin by acknowledging the very powerful intervention of the Director General this morning on the need to capture the voices of people in poverty in order to identify the true dimensions of poverty and to identify dimensions that apply in both the global north and the global south, that enable us for the first time to have a meaningful conversation, a meaningful global conversation about the nature of poverty and about the approaches to measuring it and responding to it. But in order to come up with those results which the Director General used in his presentation, we had to develop, refine, take forward a radical research approach, which we've already heard mentioned, the merging of knowledge. We began the process back in 2014. And shortly afterwards established an international coordination team. Merging of knowledge requires us to engage people in poverty, practitioners and academics within the research team. This is a major change. We're not just talking to people. People in poverty and others are at the heart of the research process. We established teams in the global south, in Bangladesh, in Bolivia, in Tanzania, and in the global north, in France, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America. It was difficult to find people who could give the time over 2.5 to 3 years to work actively on the research, to take part in its design, in its execution, in the reading of research reports, and in the analysis at the final part of that process. Their first task at national level was to think about who they should talk to go beyond the boundaries of the people that normally get caught by surveys, even beyond the boundaries of those with which they were dealing as an NGO on a day-to-day basis, to reach others far away at the fringes of our society, to talk to them, to persuade them that we would listen, to follow the guidance of Oxford University in terms of its ethical code, to provide information, to obtain informed consent. But what we knew and what came from ATD Fourth World experience of working alongside people in poverty is the need to prepare them to be able to give voice. So often in their lives, they are not listened to. They don't have practice in talking and thinking. They don't think people will listen. And throughout the research process, we took time to give people space to think, to organize their thoughts, to share them, to listen. When bringing people together, we began and prioritized people with direct experience of poverty. We worked with them, not as short focus groups, but over lengthy periods of time, 20 to 30 hours or so, sometimes over a weekend, sometimes repeatedly over a number of weeks. We asked, what is poverty like? What are the dimensions? What do they mean to you? We spoke too to academics and practitioners in peer groups. We spent rather less time with them, but more time than it takes to get them to appear on the screen. At the moment, the screen is not responding to my wishes. Have you ever been in life like that? Aha! So we talked to groups separately, but then we brought them together. We brought them together to listen and to challenge. Why did you say that? Can you justify it? And to reach some form of consensus about what those dimensions of poverty were. And we did that in those 6 countries, first of all. And then we asked the question, are there dimensions which are common across each of those 6 countries? And we brought research teams together to France last year, again to listen, to challenge, to see whether there were dimensions that were common. And to give away the main line, yes, there are, 9 of them. But before I spell them out in detail, we want to reflect again on the process of merging of knowledge. What it actually means for research and knowledge, means for the people participating in the process.
The merging of knowledge is a different process to others in the way we work by a participatory approach. As co-researchers, a collective of activists, practitioners, academics, we all had equal power and voice, as no one tried to be better than anyone else. We all co-designed this research process. Rather than gathering life stories, we focused our emphasis on the wealth of experience and knowledge that we all share, to collectively look and search for answers together.
We worked in peer groups. We gave ourselves enough time to make sure that we all knew and trusted each other. We all understood the process. We all felt comfortable and valued, regardless of social status and background. For each peer group, we choose specific tools to enable the group to work together on the research question.
Animé par l'équipe nationale.
Our national team organised the grouping of all of the peer groups, and that gave us the opportunity to merge knowledge and analyse our collective knowledge together. We worked to find a consensus which was not an accumulation of knowledge, but rather collective knowledge.
Lesson we learnt that the merging of knowledge provided a safe space for people to express themselves, to feel free to speak or not to speak. As activists, through the lived experience of poverty, we have a lot to contribute. Through being given the chance to be involved in this learning process, we have gained a lot more confidence in being able to speak to and meet with new people. But most importantly, we have gained a whole lot more respect and dignity from others in society.
We as academic researchers, we recognized people living in poverty as having wide and deep knowledge, and that we all have much to learn from them.
Nous, en tant que professionnels,
As professionals working in the field and after our collective analysis, we challenged our own ways of working, our own approaches, and our own practices.
So, the process. But what did we learn? As I indicated, we identified a number of dimensions that were common across all 6 countries. I want to start with the familiar before going on to the hidden dimensions which we believe this research reveals. Important, of course, was lack of access to decent work, to work that was fairly paid, that was safe, that was secure, that was regulated, that was dignified. Money is important. Lack of money is a major problem. Insufficient income to meet needs necessary to participate in the societies in which we are brought up and live and form part. Insecure income, which means you never know how much you will have tomorrow, which makes planning long term exceedingly difficult. Lack of sufficient money and insecure income. Thirdly, the third privation was material and social deprivation, very much the currency of the conversations that we already have alongside income when we think about defining poverty. It's not unimportant. It is part of people's lives, or the lack of it is part of people's lives. The lack of goods and services, the lack of clean water, of decent housing, of access to useful and effective education, access to high-quality healthcare. These 3 dimensions we collect together. They are familiar. We won't say more about them, but that doesn't mean that they are not important. But we identified a second set of dimensions, which had to do with relationships. We tend in poverty to focus on people who are poor, but what in many ways makes them poor are the relationships that we are part of. So social maltreatment refers to the way that we think about poverty, about what we see as being the causes, of who we blame and who we shame. Baroness Lister spoke powerfully about denying people as human beings, treating people as animals. Think of us when we find somebody begging in the street. What thoughts go across our minds? What do we do? Where do we go? Do we look eyeball to eyeball? It's a challenge. It's a challenge to us, those of us who are not poor.
In the United States, an activist said of social maltreatment, "Who you are is defined by what you have. When you have not much, you are not much. And then you're treated like you do not belong."
বাংলাদেশ থেকে সরাসরি লোকদের কাছ থেকে বলা, একজন গরিব ঘরের মেয়ে যখন কাজ শেষ করে বাহির থেকে তার কর্মস্থল থেকে ঘরে রাতের বেলায় ফিরে, তখন সমাজের বিভিন্ন মানুষ বিভিন্নভাবে তাকে কথা বলে, মন্তব্য করে। কিন্তু সেম এই কাজটাই যখন ধনী ফ্যামিলিতে একজন ধনী মেয়ের ক্ষেত্রে হয়, তখন এ ধরনের কোনো মন্তব্যই আসে না, কোনো কথাই শোনা যায় না।
People living in poverty from Bangladesh said If a poor woman doing a job and she comes late at home, there are many bad comments. But if the woman belongs to a rich family, then there's not a problem. The neighbors will not speak badly about her.
Sorry. The words that we hear are powerful. They're what our research is based on, and the words themselves reflect experience. In our work together, we thought about ways of presenting these sense of feelings in pictorial ways. Unfortunately, the PowerPoint is not treating us with respect that we deserve. But here you can see an example of the second of our relational dimensions, which refers to institutional maltreatment. The images of people carrying numbers, where institutions respond to individuals not as people, not as human beings, but as numbers to be processed. In institutional maltreatment, we're thinking about the actions and inactions of governments that don't respond appropriately to the needs and circumstances of people who are experiencing poverty.
A practitioner in the US said, "It is out of sight, out of mind government thinking. Resources are just enough to set people up to fail. The human-to-human aspect of services is missing."
Tanzania, viongozi wa serikali ya kijiji wameweka ushuru mkubwa kwa bidhaa. Endapo bidhaa unapochukua kupeleka mnadani, unapofikisha mnadani, wanahitaji ulipie ushuru. Na endapo kama haujauza, unaporudisha nyumbani tena, inahitajika ulipie.
A man with experience of poverty in Tanzania said, "The local government leaders in our village have created many taxes which affect us badly. Anything you take for sale in the market is taxed whether you sell it or not. On local auction day, if you take a goat to sell in order to get money to help your family, you must pay tax. If you cannot sell the goat, when you get out of the market, you have to pay another tax."
People in poverty contribute to our society, but their contribution is often unrecognized. For the most part, they are good parents, good neighbors, good friends, good relatives. In order to survive, they need skills, ways of coping with the threats and with the constraints that society imposes upon them. They respond at the level of individuals, coping on a day-to-day basis. They help each other, coming together collectively to solve social problems and problems in their lives. Occasionally become political, and they resist in that way as activists, social activists working within the community. We often assume they offer nothing, that people in poverty are incompetent. Their lives demonstrate great competence, if only to survive.
Les personnes en situation.
People living in poverty in France say, sometimes we're considered less than nothing, but we do have things to contribute. We also see things. We often feel useless to society, but we can be useful. We can contribute our knowledge to other people. We have things to say. We also have our intelligence.
Una persona en situación de pobreza.
A person who is
Para conseguir recursos económicos. Sabemos tejer, podemos vender, reciclar. Sabemos hacer tantas cosas, pero nadie dice ellos se esfuerzan. Eso es invisibilizado.
So poverty is at least in part shaped by our relationships, the relationships of non-poor with people who have direct experience of poverty on a day-to-day basis. We limit their actions, we impose constraints. But at the heart of poverty is a sense of suffering in body, mind, and heart. Poverty shortens lives. Poverty drives people to depression, to despair, and even to suicide. Poverty eats away at one's ability to cope. People feel pain. Parents feel pain on behalf of their children. Their children feel pain on behalf of their parents. They suffer together. We make them suffer.
A practitioner from Tanzania said, I asked my school pupils to run around a football pitch to stimulate their bodies. Suddenly, I saw about 6 or 7 pupils had collapsed. At first, we thought that they were sick. Then, we discovered it was because of hunger. Children in poor families become weak because they go to bed without eating and have no breakfast before school.
En France,
in France, people living in poverty say, living in poverty is living in fear. Fear of the next day, fear of what's going to happen in the future, fear of losing what we have. Housing, work, food, documentation, all of these things can quickly become a hell.
sufrimiento en Bolivia. La realidad de la pobreza es amplia y compleja. Las familias pobres sufrimos en diferentes dimensiones para lograr mantener a nuestra familia. Y este sufrimiento es en todas partes del mundo. La pobreza te quita tu humanidad, te daña en lo más profundo de tu ser y no te deja avanzar. Ojalá que todas las autoridades de la sociedad civil pueden escucharnos y así entender la realidad de la pobreza en todas sus dimensiones para que ya no haya más pobreza, porque todos somos responsables.
We must never forget the suffering that we impose through the existence of poverty. But at the same time, we must acknowledge the struggle and the resistance of people who are poor. People in poverty are not necessarily passive. In fact, in order to survive, they have to struggle, they have to be active, they have to overcome obstacles in their lives that would cause us enormous difficulties. They act together to resist, to confront the challenges and constraints imposed upon them. They are creative in their response. They come together as communities. They come together politically again, as activists, giving voice to their demands. To forget the active nature of poverty, that it's lived by individuals who are creative and strong, is a danger.
A woman living in poverty in Tanzania, as a stonebreaker said, We are overworked and underpaid. We are the first to wake up and the last to go to bed. Most women who work in the quarry usually get up at 5 p.m. They have to wake up to 4 p.m. At the end of the day, they are paid 2,000 to 5,000 Tanzanian shillings, which is equivalent to 0.85 to 2.10 US dollars.
In the United Kingdom, a mother told us, if the state takes your child away because of poverty, what is left behind is immense suffering. The action is recognized, but not the suffering, nor what we do to continue to overcome and to work together. These are two sides of the same coin.
The human statue here, which reflects struggle and resistance of people coming together, of lifting people up.
Resisting.
It is resisting, and I'm struggling. And at the moment, its resistance is ahead of my struggle. Ah, well, that's a step forward. Right. Okay. The heart, the core of poverty experience is this interaction between suffering, which we mustn't forget, and struggle that we have to acknowledge. But poverty on a day-to-day basis is often felt as a lack of control, where one is confronted by limited options and difficult choices, where the choices are often made not by me, but by others. A process of disempowerment, of constraint and restriction. The lack of voice, the lack of control over my life, to know that tomorrow I don't know what will happen and can do very little about it. And again, it's a relational dimension. The sense of disempowerment is something that is imposed from the outside by us and the institutions that we create.
বাংলাদেশ থেকে সরাসরি লোকদের কাছ থেকে আসা ধনী লোকেরা সব কিছুই কিনতে পারে। তারা তাদের ক্ষমতা ব্যবহার করে গরিব মানুষের যা প্রাপ্য তা সব কিছু তার কাছ থেকে ছিনিয়ে নেয়। সমাজের যত ধরনের সুযোগ সুবিধা আছে সব কিছু তাদের জন্য।
People living in poverty from Bangladesh said rich people can buy everything. They use their power to take everything a poor person deserves. They can access everything society has to offer.
A decision maker in the UK told us poverty creates a situation where you expect that blows may come from anywhere, at any time, from any source, and you must be permanently braced against them.
So we have 9 dimensions. 3 which we feel were familiar. 6 which we think are new or rarely spoken about. They are common, shared across all the 6 countries, north and south, in which we worked. But the particular complexion of poverty is influenced by what we have termed modifiers. The first modifier is location, where poverty occurs, whether it's a rural environment or an urban environment, whether it's north or south. The nature of the infrastructure around you. Poverty experience in a rich area is probably different from poverty experience in a deprived neighborhood. Second of the modifiers is when poverty occurs, its timing. Poverty in childhood appears to be very different from poverty in old age. Poverty in working age is different again. Long spells of poverty are different from short spells of poverty. But whether either is better than repeated spells of poverty is an open question, but one that certainly shapes the experience of people in their everyday lives. Those dimensions common across countries were nevertheless nuanced by national cultures, about collective understandings of whether poverty is primarily a structural phenomena or whether it's a result of individual failing. Both shaped by identity. People in poverty are discriminated against. Often people are discriminated on grounds of ethnicity, of gender and on race and on sexuality. Those discriminations are often compounded, and so we find multiple identities shaping the nature of poverty as it is experienced. And the last modifier, but by certainly not the least, is the environmental factors. At a global level, we encountered the impact of climate change, of environmental degradation, of pollution, and the effectiveness, or at least the redistribution of resources that come from policy that addresses pollution. But also operating at the micro level, in the neighbourhood in which you live, the access to infrastructures. Again, they shape the day-to-day experience. They influence the way that each dimension impacts on individuals' lives. And it's important to think about the interaction between these dimensions. The dimensions themselves are important, but they operate together. It is through the interaction of those dimensions that poverty is shaped and the constraints that people face are forged.
This research found that all dimensions are interrelated and that we cannot address one dimension without considering its impact on others, because it can cause negative consequences for people living in poverty. All countries that worked on this research found that the dimensions are interrelated. However, due to limited time, we are going to share one with you.
In one of the countries that participated in this research, a community center consulted with the parents to know what project they would like to implement as a priority in their neighborhood. Some of the parents shared the worry that their children were missing school or were dropping out of school. The teachers at the local school had the same concern, and they were interested to work on this issue with the community center and the parents. So, the community center put in place a project to work with the parents and the school to help the children who dropped out of school to resume their schooling. The community center staff organized meetings between teachers and parents, but the parents did not participate. They did not participate because most of them had had negative experiences at school when they were children, and because the families were stigmatized in the neighborhood. The parents also feared that they would be held responsible if their children dropped out. They were afraid of not being able to understand the teachers and not being understood by them because of language barriers, but also because the parents felt like they did not belong in the school environment. The teachers did not understand why the parents did not come to the meetings and blamed them, thinking that they did not care for their children. In this example, by wanting to address the dropout of the children and the corresponding dimension of material and social deprivation, the community center and the school did not take into account other dimensions like suffering, social maltreatment, and institutional maltreatment. Fears paralyzed and disempowered the parents.
Voy a hablar en español. Este ejemplo también nos enseña que al concentrarse sobre una sola dimensión sin tomar en cuenta las otras dimensiones, aumenta el maltrato institucional y la estigmatización de los padres. Y aquellos aparecen aún más como responsables del ausentismo de sus hijos. Los niños no vuelven a la escuela y los padres se sienten aún más incapaces de solucionar el ausentismo de sus hijos. Entonces, las interacciones entre las dimensiones de la pobreza no solo son en términos de causa y efecto, sino que la interacción es circular. Es un círculo vicioso que encierra a las personas en el...
This is a vicious cycle that has to do with suffering and disempowerment. In order to understand poverty, none of the dimensions can be taken as a standalone experience. The dimensions need to be understood in their interactions with the other dimensions.
So what? I'm sure you would draw your own conclusions, but I want my co-researchers to share our thoughts on our conclusions and offer you our recommendations.
Lo primero que queremos destacar.
First of all, we would like to highlight the importance of engagement. This experience showed that it is necessary to engage with the people who experience poverty. We felt that we were in a trusting environment and that we could share our knowledge that came with a life of daily poverty and that we could thus forge new knowledge together. We want to participate. But we don't just want to be asked or consulted. We want to be a part of new policies from the beginning to the end, taking into account what we can contribute. Our participation was made possible in this project, and we believe that we can truly engage with further research and therefore contribute to completely eradicating poverty.
La deuxième chose avec laquelle on veut...
The second thing that we want to share with you is that the idea of this participation made it possible for us to discover a new definition of poverty. A new definition of poverty based on the experience of people living in poverty. We revealed the hidden dimensions of poverty, and we no longer want it to be hidden. We no longer want it to be hidden, particularly by on the basis of monetary indicators. As you've heard just before, the dimensions should not be separated out because they're all interrelated. And for us, researchers who were involved in the program, this is a huge step forwards when it comes to indicators on poverty.
I would like to conclude by saying, in order to end poverty, we have to do it together. People with the direct experience of poverty, practitioners, and academics. With the merging of knowledge, ATD Fourth World has developed meaningful participation beyond just consultation from beginning to end. As co-researchers, designing the research tools to co-writers. Use our merging of knowledge methodology. Poverty is multidimensional, so we need solutions that are multidimensional also. Use our results. We invite you to join us as institutional partners to develop indicators and measurements in a truly participatory manner that uses the merging of knowledge and that reflects this new understanding of poverty. On behalf of my fellow co-researchers, merci, thank you, gracias.
Thank you so much. I want to thank all the speakers, all who have told us about the results of this study using their own words and reflecting on the work that's been carried out in the fields. So thank you again, and thank you, Robert, for having summarized and brought this presentation to us. I think we learned a lot. That was extremely interesting. We will discuss in more depth in the next sessions and in the panel.